Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm David Bowles, and today I'm delighted to share my latest book with you that I wrote with my beautiful wife, Jana Sweeney. The idea is all about the language that lives in the shoulder. Arm angles in American Sign Language. A study of proximal articulation in signed discourse. Here is something I did not expect to discover while writing a textbook about American Sign Language. The shoulder knows things the hand cannot say. That sentence sounds like metaphor. It is not. It is linguistics, documented and measurable, and it has been sitting in plain sight for as long as deaf people have been signing to each other. The position of the arm, the engagement of the shoulder, the extension or contraction of the elbow, these carry meaning. Not incidental meaning, not decorative meaning. Semantic meaning that changes what a sign communicates, even when the handshape stays exactly the same. Consider what this implies about how consciousness expresses itself through the body. We tend to think of language as something that happens in the head. Words form in the mind and then exit through the mouth or through the fingers if we are typing. But the origin point is cognitive, neural, somewhere behind the eyes where the self is supposed to live. The body is just the delivery system. The meaning is elsewhere. Signed languages complicate this picture in ways that should trouble anyone who thinks carefully about what language is and where it lives. When a deaf signer produces the sign "understand," the hand moves near the forehead. But the arm positions that hand, and the degree of arm involvement changes the pragmatic meaning of the sign. More shoulder engagement reads as more emphatic, more formal, more certain. Less shoulder engagement reads as more casual, more intimate, more efficient. The signer is not consciously choosing these variations in most cases. The body knows what register is appropriate. The shoulder engages or relaxes according to social context, and meaning shifts accordingly. I wonder sometimes whether this is language using the body or the body using language. The distinction may not be as clear as we assume. Jana Sweeney, my co-author on the textbook we have titled Arm Angles in American Sign Language, was born deaf in Council Bluffs, Iowa. She learned to sign at the Iowa School for the Deaf, and she has been teaching American Sign Language at New York University for over 35 years. When I watch her sign, I see something that took me years to understand. The meaning is not just in what she does with her hands. The meaning is distributed across her entire upper body, shoulders and elbows and torso, all participating in the communication. Her body thinks in sign language. That is not a poetic way of saying she is fluent. It is a literal description of how embodied cognition works. When the language you think in is visual and spatial rather than acoustic and temporal. Spoken languages unfold in time. One sound follows another, and the sequence creates meaning. Signed languages unfold in space. Multiple articulators operate simultaneously, the two hands doing different things, the face providing grammatical information, the body orientation establishing reference points. The language happens in 3 dimensions, and consciousness must somehow coordinate all of it into coherent expression. How does that feel from the inside? I cannot know. I learned sign language as an adult, which means I translate from English in ways that native signers do not. But I can observe what happens when the body becomes fluent in a spatial language, and what I observe suggests that consciousness is far more distributed than our folk psychology assumes. The textbook we wrote addresses proximal and distal articulation. These are technical terms that refer to whether movement originates closer to the torso at the shoulder and upper arm, or further from it at the wrist and fingers. Signs can be produced along a continuum from maximally proximal to maximally distal, and where they fall on that continuum carries meaning independent of the hand shape or location or movement path. The arm angle is itself a parameter, a dimension of the sign that contributes to what it communicates. This means that signers must somehow track, in real time, not just what their hands are doing, but what their entire arms are doing, coordinating multiple joints across multiple limbs, while simultaneously managing facial expression and body orientation. The cognitive load would be overwhelming if it were conscious. It is not conscious, or not entirely conscious, which raises the question of where exactly language processing happens when the language is signed. Research on sign language and the brain has shown that deaf signers process language in the same left hemisphere regions that hearing people use for spoken language. The neural architecture for language is not specific to sound. It is specific to structured communication, and it recruits whatever sensory and motor systems are available. But the motor systems recruited for signing are far more extensive than those recruited for speech. The entire upper body becomes an articulator. Consciousness, whatever it is, must somehow encompass all of that. I find myself wondering whether signed languages reveal something about consciousness that spoken languages obscure. When language happens in the throat and mouth, the body can seem incidental, just the machinery that produces the sounds. When language happens across the arms and torso and face, the body cannot be bracketed out. The body is where the language lives, and if language is how we organize thought, then thought lives there too, in the shoulder that knows to engage for emphasis, in the elbow that extends for formality, in the spatial envelope that expands and contracts according to social context. The textbook is practical. 12 chapters covering anatomy, spatial dimensions, register variation, classifier predicates, biomechanics, pedagogy. It is designed for advanced learners and instructors and interpreters who need explicit instruction in aspects of signing that native signers absorb intuitively. But underneath the pedagogy is a question that the textbook does not directly address because it is not that kind of book. The question is this: what does it mean that meaning lives in the body? Not just in the hands, in the arms and the shoulders, in the angles and extensions and rotations that position the hands where they need to be. Meaning saturates the physical form of the signer in ways that challenge any simple division between mind and body, between the self that intends to communicate and the flesh that carries out the intention. I do not have an answer. I am not sure there is one answer, but I know that writing this textbook changed how I think about what language is and where consciousness resides. The shoulder knows things. The elbow carries meaning. The body thinks in ways we are only beginning to understand. Arm Angles in American Sign Language is available now from David Bowles Books. There is a Kindle edition, a paperback version, plus a free PDF for those who want to read it. But this episode is not really about the book. It is about what the book made me notice, that when we externalize language into visible space, we can see something about cognition that speech keeps hidden. The body is not just the instrument of the mind. The body is where the mind happens, and signed languages, by distributing meaning across the physical form of the signer, make that distribution visible in ways that should give all of us pause. The shoulder knows things the hand cannot say. I wonder what else it knows that we have not yet learned to ask. For more information, go to bowlesbooks.com. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a great evening and a good tomorrow. Be a human meme.